صلى عليه الله ربي وعلى صحابه وآله ومن تلا. عليه الله ربي وعلى صحابه وآله ومن تلا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تلا. So, Hadith 16, and the same method is going to be used today for the Q&A we'll have in the end. The Slido link we'll share. If it's not working, we can have a look at it inshallah in the end. I think it makes sense to have a look at it. Can someone confirm it's working or not? Because there is a possibility that you might get a question while the Hadith is being discussed, and you can just throw it in there so it can be looked at in the end.
Same link?
Yeah. Is it working?
Yeah.
Can you send questions?
Yeah, looks like it.
All right. Can you try sending one? It doesn't have to be your actual question.
Yeah, I'll just say text. Yeah, it works.
It works?
Yeah.
Okay. So the same Slido link. Let me just, someone can just share it again. Yeah, that link is what will be used to have the okay, yeah. So Bismillah. So the first hadith we'll do, it's quite interesting, as the other narrations are too. If someone has not noticed yet, then I use the word narration as a translation for hadith. You know, you can use other words too. Assalamu alaikum. Like narratives, traditions, narrations. Just relative, I prefer using the word narration more often. So anyone who gets confused at what we're talking about, then just consider it to be a hadith, right? So the first narration, the 16th narration, or hadith 16, that is about borrowing to assist marital rights. So in order to either initiate it or to do anything. So let's look at it, inshallah. The hadith is narrated by Bukhari and At-Tirmidhi, who calls it Hasan Sahih after bringing it, and also An-Nasa'i rahimahullah with the sound chain of transmission. عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عفوا عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أنه مشى إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the narration comes from Anas bin Malik رضي الله عنه, and it is an authentic narration as it is narrated by Bukhari and others with the sound chain, that he once went or walked to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم بخبز شعير, and he had bread that was made of barley with him, وإهارة سنخة, and he also had some sort of dissolved fat that was either applied to it or separate. But it just says what ihada sanikha. Sanikha means like it's something that was made to sit for a bit, so it dissolved, right, or heated to a little. ولقد رهن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم درعا له بالمدينة عند يهودية. And by Allah, well, what am I translating by Allah here as? The lam. The lam. Yeah. The waw is far'af, like and. The lam, which is just passively sometimes referred to as the lam of the ta'keed or tawkeed for emphasis. And by the way, the sisters that wish to come to inside the mosque so they can ask questions or hear me clearly, they can come in, inshallah, if they wish to. Yeah, so the lam. Contrary to Abu Hayyan rahimahullah, who's from, as far as my knowledge, or as to my knowledge, he's the only one notable from the latter-day scholars of syntax who does not agree with this. The vast majority are of the view that this lam that comes, the lam with tawkeed or emphasis, is actually a lam al-qasam. That is the lam that denotes an oath that's being taken. Right, so by Allah is understood. So the emphasis that comes is the difference between the two would be the emphasis is a lot more strong if you were to understand an oath in there as well. So, and by Allah, رهن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Prophet عليه السلام, he kept a درع له that belonged to him, that is a piece of armor that belonged to him. رهن بالمدينة, he kept it or placed it as a collateral in Medina عند يهودي, with a Jewish person. وأخذ منه شعيرا لأهله, and in lieu of that collateral, that person that is that was placed with the Jewish person, the Prophet ﷺ borrowed some barley for his family, or his wives more correctly. So the word an is a bit tricky. You would see in this context, even though I've translated it as his family, it could be his wives as well, because the Prophet ﷺ did not really have all the time children with him, right? And this seems to be when he's in Medina, and it seems like when, as it will mention later, that he had multiple wives as well. So it seems like it's later in his life. But his wives first and foremostly, and then whoever would be from his family, right? That is emphasized as it comes after. وَلَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ يَقُولُ, and by Allah, and I did indeed hear him, that is the Prophet ﷺ, say, مَا أَمْسَى عِنْدَ آلِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَاعُ بُرٍّ. Amsa, Yumsi, refers to the passing of the evening. The Masa refers to the evening. So no evening passed, literally. عند آل Muhammad, upon or with the progeny or the family of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, صاع بر. صاع بر. Bur refers to wheat, and sa' is a unit of measurement. It's just not that much, just a little. The point is like it's little. The point is not that it was actually weighed or measured or any of those things were done. It's actually just it was very little, just a little you can have. So you can say a handful in terms of its meaning, just a handful of it, or hands full of it, I guess. Right, a sa' is slightly bigger, right? وَلَا صَعُ حَبٍّ, and he did not even have. This is translated here as an evening meal because of the fact that you would eat it at night. So like no night passed literally. But I would say that if you were to keep it true to its linguistic meaning, it would be a lot more emphatic. The night did not pass with that being present is more emphatically understood rather than a meal did not consist of bur, wheat, or had, that is seeds or grains, etc. of any kind. So the latter part is actually more generic. It tells you not just wheat, any other grain was not there. وَإِنَّ عِنْدَهُ لَتِسْعَ نِسْوَةٍ. This is at a time when the Prophet ﷺ had 9 wives. How many wives did he have? 9. So someone would say that, well, because of the fact that polygyny is considered to be a big taboo in many circles, someone would say that, well, wouldn't it make more sense to have fewer wives, and then you can live in a better way? But it seems like the Prophet ﷺ's lifestyle was different from this cultural or whatever is considered to be the normal standard these days, right? And what's interesting is that there is a drive among people that everything needs to be in line with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The Sunnah, along with its misunderstandings, right? Misunderstandings people have, that they would say that this is a Sunnah, and you would say that, is it though? Right? There are contradictions to that as well. But on top of that, if you were to say that, okay, there is some sort of like Sunnah that is being followed, then what happened here? Hypothetically, there are many things that people say that, well, it has been narrated by the Prophet or from the Prophet ﷺ, so it will be considered to be a Sunnah now. You're like, that's just an instance though, or it doesn't even count among those things that we would regard as Sunnah. But you say that, it's still related from the Prophet ﷺ, and some emotional argument comes in. The moment you ask them, how come you don't speak Arabic? Because the Prophet ﷺ spoke Arabic his whole life, right? Then they go, well, is it really necessary though? What's the legal ruling related to it? So you're like, okay, that could be applicable to other things as well, right? What is the other thing do you think that it will be applicable to? Tell me. I'm asking you guys.
Spending the whole night praying this.
Yeah, right? Lead ruling. We said, well, good one. So spending the whole night praying. What's the second one? Fasting Mondays and Thursdays all the time. But that's actually like in instruction too, right? I'm talking about those things that the Prophet ﷺ himself did, and there's no instruction that is coming, and you're taking it as a sunnah, even though the tahajjud has its own instructions as well. Siwak has an instruction as well. The way he dressed. That's interesting, yeah? Where is there an instruction that goes like, you gotta dress like me, brothers? My companions all have to dress like me. I'm serious. What else?
Riding an animal.
Right. Riding an animal. That's a good one too, right? Everyone has their own like flexibilities when it comes to stuff like that, and you go, okay, so it seems like not every single thing that has been related from him has to be considered to be a sunnah. So that's a different discussion altogether. But let's just say that let's accept it, right? Let's accept it, and then you go, like, okay, so either we will say that this is included in whatever will be genuinely be classified as a sunnah or not. There's a whole discussion about this. I personally, I would say that it's not considered to be a sunnah in a way that you have to do it, or as people understand it to be. Sunnah is like a very tricky discussion, to be honest, even though it shouldn't be. But it has been made to be a tricky discussion. Generally, people understand that whatever the Prophet ﷺ did, that's considered to be a sunnah. Whatever he did, right? Whatever has been related from him. Now, again, going back to what I was talking about, that okay, so that should apply to certain things as well. So they say, well, not those things. Well, they say, but there's no actual rule of thumb or a guideline that is being followed in including and excluding things. That's the problem. If you're excluding something, then and saying that, well, okay, it's a sunnah, but it doesn't have to be followed, why? The why needs to be answered. If you're saying that, well, it's a sunnah that it has to be followed, should also have a why now. Because if one thing is being negated because of this being an exception, you will have to prove that this is not an exception now, right? Or whatever the exceptions are, we will have to point them out. We will say, okay, this is an exception, this is an exception, this is an exception. Now you would have to prove that this is an exception too if you were to say that it's not supposed to be followed or it's supposed to be followed. But those people who do keep it generic, what happened here? I've heard all sorts of like things about that. The first point obviously we're focusing on in this hadith is the polygyny aspect of it, right? We will come to the boring part of it because it is connected. But what happened to this? Well, it was done due to tribal connections. Well, he also belonged to a tribe where everybody dressed in the same manner, right? So why is it not applied to your dressing? What if someone were to say that, well, the reason why I prefer not wearing, because it's a matter of preference, right? People, when you talk about polygyny, you would say that, well, it's not for me. I don't prefer it, but I'm fine with it, right? I allow it, is what I've heard too. Like it's been allowed by Allah, but it's okay, I allow it, but I don't prefer it. Good, you can have your preference. But if someone else says, I'm just saying that there's an inconsistency. Someone else says that, well, I prefer wearing like track pants and a hoodie every day. They were like, well, that's not the libas of sunnah, right? That's not the libas of sunnah. So like, what's like differentiating the two? Someone can be like, well, what about the polygyny aspect of it? You go like, well, that was done, talking about the tribal aspect of it. That was done because the Prophet ﷺ belonged in those times. There was Arab culture, they would say. Because out of sight, out of mind. If there are not enough Arabs around you, that means Arabs, they used to exist. Because Arab culture allowed this, right? Which is very strange because you're like, okay, so someone could be like, that's Arab cultural dressing, right? It's like, well, the Arabs still wear it. It's like, well, the Arabs still could be polygynous or not. It doesn't have to do with like being Arab or not, right? As we will comment later on, there are certain narrations in which it is mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ saw certain people having multiple wives, 9 or whatever has been related. And the Prophet ﷺ told that person, even the narration has some, problematic narrators, but the Prophet ﷺ told the person that, well, you know what, just cut it down to to 4. You cannot have that many wives. So why was that done? When the culture allowed it. When the Prophet ﷺ saw a man, according to that narration, and told him to bring it down to 4 when he had many wives, what was the cultural aspect over there that's playing a role? Obviously, it was religious, right? The religion only allows 4. You cannot have more than that. We will discuss polygyny more, but this is just like the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, it is related from him. It needs to be accepted wholeheartedly. The first excuse that comes is that, well, it's tribal. Doesn't make any sense. You can apply that to anything. That's never a reasoning for something to be there or not. You guys have to make sense of what is used to make sense of things. Like the istidlal has to make sense. The other one is that, what is there? What are the excuses? I don't even know the excuses that much, but the tribal one is very famous, right? The culture was such that it allowed it. There's another one that I've heard, and coincidentally, the source of it is actually a daughter of a religious scholar from our beloved city, right? Is that men are too weak now to have multiple wives, right? Right? Do you remember the hadith that we did before? That Marra bi fulana, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that a woman passed, and then he went inside and they performed sexual intercourse with one of the females that he was married to. And then what did he say after that? That whatever she has it too. What's the difference? I don't get it. What are you not supposed to handle? What can you not handle physically? They're different things, right? You go, okay, emotionally, physically, and financially, you have to be there as a couple. Is there anything else I'm missing? Right? So physically, I think all men can speak for themselves when they can say that, well, you know what, it's not that big of a difference. Isn't it? Non-Muslims and Muslims alike. Like a man does not get like, oh man, I'm really bothered his wives. I got 2 wives, so I have to be like physically more active for both of them. Some guys are like, this guy's crazy. Like what is he talking about? Right? Emotionally, well, as people say, as time has passed, women have changed too, right? Women are different types. Alhamdulillah. Like there's definitely I'm not gonna like speak on behalf of women, obviously, but no, I've dealt with women for years, like your brothers have too, and there's definitely a challenge, right, from like the men's side. Like you can notice the difference that okay, they think differently, we think differently, but it's not. Don't you have like multiple other women in your lives too? You kind of like compartmentalize. If someone does not have sisters and his mother passed away, he has a wife, you think this guy's having a great time for sure? Not necessarily. It's about compatibility. The emotional connection is about compatibility. It's not about the number of women involved. So one woman and one man together in a monogamous relationship can actually have problematic emotional issues, and 3 women and 1 man can possibly not have that because it's just the fact that they will be compatible. Does that make sense? The last part, which is the most important part, I would say, because that's where you've got yourselves in a chokehold, right? Because you're like, okay, the other stuff we can deal with because it doesn't really require a lot, but this requires actual effort to be manifested, right? Which is the finances. So here comes this hadith that mentions that the Prophet ﷺ had 9 females. We are not allowed to have 9 females, obviously, right? The Prophet ﷺ had 9 females, and he was boring to get wheat. It's food. Not just for himself. It says very clearly. You go like, yeah, maybe, you know what? He spent all of his finances on his wives because it was a requirement. And then for himself, he felt like having some sha'ir. So he put his armor as a collateral and then he got that money. No, it says, وَأَخَذَ مِنْهُ شَعِيرًا لِأَهْلِهِ. You think about it, and we all live, or have relatives in the West. Do you think in the West no one's in debt? Everyone's in debt. You're going to be in debt if you're, not literally everybody, obviously. A lot of people are not, but many people are. Many people are. Like I would say, if you keep like generally, majority of people would be somehow in debt, or at least they're taking advantage of the fact that they can borrow money, right? Both things. Either they are in debt, like they're not paying, like they're supposed to pay and they're not, or they've got credit cards, right? So they can always be like, yeah, okay, so I have that money coming at this time, I can spend this. The flexibility is still there. It helps people, right? And people do that. Everyone does that at some point. It doesn't make sense for you to be like, okay, then I'll be, it happens. It happens with one wife. It could happen with multiple wives as well. But the fact that some people use as an excuse that because of the fact that you will not be able to financially support yourself, then it is, you shouldn't, or whatever the legal ruling is mentioned, you cannot have multiple wives. That's not valid. Does that make sense? Not just invalid in the sense of like, okay, there is no proof for it. There is proof to the contrary. There is proof to the contrary that a man had multiple wives and he was borrowing money to feed them. Who's that man? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we'll talk about the sunnah after this, right? Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not encouraging people to actually get married and get multiple wives here at this point, right? That's not the point, because I already told you that I'm saying that whatever is the sunnah needs to be done, right? And there's also other factors, whether the first wife agrees or the second wife knows about the first wife or not, and all those discussions have to be there. You have to take the right social steps as well based on this. If your first wife is such that, this needs to be understood among guys too. If your first, and this obviously does not enable others, but it is a fact that needs to be said out there. If your first wife is such that it will be a very, very problematic issue if she were to be in a polygynous situation, right? Then either you get ready to ruin everything, or you have to be something, I don't know, miraculous. Like, you will ruin things for sure. You would 100% ruin things. So she has to be like on board with it. So the Prophet ﷺ's wives, they were all on board. Like, even though someone would argue and say, well, it's not a condition, whatever, that's about, like, we'll get into polygyny or the major discussions related to polygyny later on. I'm just touching on the fact that borrowing money for marriage is permissible, and in light of this, the financial excuse, or what's mentioned that about the finances are not going to be good, that's not good enough. It comes down to, again, the man's personal preference. Just as the woman has the right to have the personal preference of, like, don't want to be in a polygynous relationship, the man can also have the personal preference of, like, I don't mind being in debt as long as I have two wives. So the argument that, well, how are you going to support them? Are you going to be equal to them, etc.? Those are your personal issues. Those are your personal issues. Like, one person I know, they were talking, and then they go like, well, they were talking about, like, I don't really introduce myself as such. It's kind of strange. But we were talking, and this other person came, and coincidentally, they were all like, educated, like Islamically learned, trained, traditionally people. And then one of them goes like, oh, do you know that this guy's got like two wives? And he goes like, oh, really? So as long as you give them their equal rights, mashallah, then it's okay. And I was just standing there, and I was like, what's that? Like, well, that's such like a strange thing to say. Like, that's none of your business. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like me talking to a guy who's monogamous, and they go like, well, as long as you're fulfilling our sexual rights, you must have a good marriage. That's none of your business. Back off. The reason why people are so judgmental is because there is a negative understanding about it altogether, that, well, you know what? There are too many cases of people not dealing with them equally. The wives that they have, right? I'm not discussing here the civil issue, obviously, because in a civil way you cannot really have two different wives. But I'm talking about the Islamic nikah that is urfi, in a sense. Sorry, you had a question?
That rule that if you cannot be equal with other wives comes actually from this side version of that if you cannot.
So we will discuss the equality aspect later, because there's a hadith that talks about it too, right? That will be from the 40 hadiths that we'll be discussing. That is what happens and what things are there in which the equality would be applicable. But there's the theory and the practice of it. Both need to be taken into consideration, right? If you were to say the theory that I extract from this ayah, that you can take only one if you're not equal towards them, versus people who have actually had multiple wives and they're striving towards it, you said, okay, then everyone's actually trying to be equal, right, towards them. Is it possible for you to somehow, like partially, temporarily, go through certain phases in which you're not being equal to them? Yeah, but that would be applicable to anything else too, right? If you have children, you have to be equal among your children as well. Are there times sometimes parents are not able to maintain that? Yeah, because it's normal. It's really difficult to keep it equal among all children, isn't it? But if you were to do it and you're constantly maintaining it in a way that you are going after it, then it needs to be understood that okay, it can manifest. I hope that's clear. But we'll discuss the questions later, inshallah. The one question is important though here. It talks about that's asking what's the difference between mortgaging versus selling. Over here, the word rahan came, I guess that's why. It's loaning money, or loaning or lending money, and the debtor places something as a collateral that will be a mortgage, and selling is just a trade of two things in its most generic sense. So, anyways, that was the first point. So the second point that I'd like to make about this hadith. The first point is understood, right? Is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ had multiple wives and he was assisting his marital rights in that polygynous situation through money that he was borrowing. So there is precedence, religious precedence present for it. The second one is the fact that why would this not be applicable to just having a wife? So let's come out of the discussion of polygyny. Let's look at monogamous relationships, right? So just as you can actually borrow money to continue the rights that you're maintaining for your partner. I mean, the main responsibility is the husband, so you would say that the responsibilities you're maintaining for your wife, right, in a monogamous relationship. Then why can you not do the same or adopt the same method to initiate the marriage? Am I making sense or not? Well, what are one of the main challenges that you have while you're getting married young here? Well, convincing your parents, finishing your education, and the third thing is like to be financially stable, right? So you convinced your parents, and your education is like, well, I can do it before, after, whatever. Because the main link between the two is that, I mean, very few people have that situation of like not being distracted. Right, the distraction is like, okay, I would actually possibly be less distracted during my education if I were to get married, right? Because that's what universities are here. You probably get more distracted, right? The last thing is, okay, the financial thing. Is it allowed for someone to borrow money and get married? Yes, 100%. Why wouldn't it be allowed? It's completely fine. The main thing is protecting yourself. So if you were to compare two things, that's what's happening. You protecting your chastity and protecting yourself from sinning, right? Versus what? Being in debt. It makes sense for you to actually take that leap and be like, okay, I can be in debt, but I am, going to get married and protect myself. So this whole theory of like not being able to marry because of, again, like, individual cases are very hard to judge because everyone could have multiple factors playing a role as to why this person is not getting married. So we're not going to point fingers and be like, okay, this person did not get married for 10 years. You don't know what issues he went through. But we definitely have a crisis, though, in the sense that everyone's getting married in the late 20s. That's because the main factor is the parents, too. From at least based on my experience, the parents, both in the East and the West, are such that they would say, you're not even financially stable, so how would you get married? Right? You would not be able to provide for her the way it needs to be provided. The way things are need to be. Someone said that they did not get that. Get what? That is it allowed for you to borrow?
Has to be like interest free, right?
Yeah.
get clarified.
Yeah. Okay. Now that which part did you not get? Okay, if you can clarify. The second part of the hadith itself, or the second point I was making. Okay, the second part of the hadith, I mean, is that it just says that the Prophet ﷺ had 9 wives. The second point is that just as it is permissible for a man that is the Prophet ﷺ, my focus over here is obviously not like, oh, he was a man sort of thing. My focus is that, well, a person. If it's permissible for a person to borrow from a Jewish person, borrow money and then place something valuable in it as a collateral so that he can provide for his family, it is also permissible that when he has multiple wives, when he is in a polygynous situation, it is also permissible for a man to do that while he is in a monogamous relationship, and not just in the sense of maintaining it, but also in the sense of initiating. Because there is no actual difference between the two, because when it comes to protecting your chastity, it remains exactly the same before and after marriage. Isn't it? Like the whole purpose, do you think that you get married and then you have performed sexual intercourse and then khalas, you go back to your single life? That's not what happens. You continue to protect yourself and stay chaste, right? And protect yourself from sinning as well. But that was clear. There's another narration that comes here by al-Bukhari rahimahullah that I've added. This is al-Bukhari rahimahullah and Sa'id ibn Jubayr. It is narrated from Sa'id ibn Jubayr, who was one of the close companions of Abdullah ibn Abbas. قال لابن عباس, Ibn Abbas said to me, هل تزوجت? Did you get married? قلت لا. He said no. قال فتزوج. So Ibn Abbas told him to get married. فإن خير هذه الأمة أكثرها نساء. Because the best person of this ummah is the one who has the most women. This is narrated by al-Bukhari from Ibn Abbas. What does that mean? Someone give me well, Ibn Abbas is not the Prophet ﷺ. I promise you, if it was the Prophet ﷺ too, they would have been like, well, but it probably means not in our times. Men are not strong enough. How is I really don't understand. Like, how did you figure that out? The men are not strong enough anymore. Because there are plenty of people who are maintaining proper polygynies. If you are a person that was disrupting like families, or you were just waiting for the fall of someone and then it happened and it didn't work out, or the person himself was a poor performer as a husband in a monogamous or a polygynous situation, or he was not able to handle, or certain social things were changing it in a way that whatever happened, that does not mean that no man can do it, right? Because men also fail in marriages that are monogamous. That does not mean that you could put a blanket statement that men are not strong enough to get married now. There are many men that failed in monogamous relationships. So that's the majority of the cases, because the majority of the cases are monogamous marriages. So it's related from Ibn Abbas that he said to Sa'id ibn Jubayr to get married because the person who has the most females, he is the one who's the greatest of this ummah. This is an indirect reference to the Prophet ﷺ himself, right? So some people have definitely interpreted it here as, well, there's no actual significance of polygyny that's present here. It's actually the best man was married, right? But that could have been like فإن خير هذه الأمة متزوج أو كان متزوجا, because the best person of this ummah was also married. The both points are there, right? They're not mutually exclusive. Like both points were made that get married because the best person was the one who had the most wives, right? So if you can afford to get more wives, good. If not, then delving into getting married and being intimate with your wives is considered to be a good thing too, right? What time is Isha? All right, so let's wait for the brother to come for the adhan, inshallah. Meantime, we'll read the hadith after. Is he here? All right. All right, we'll continue. We'll read the hadith after it's short too. Hadith 17 is foregoing and forgiving female partners, particularly. So it says there's a mistake here. Sorry, it should be عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. That is narrated from Abu Hurairah that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة. That a believing man would not have hatred towards a believing woman. He should not. He must not. Right? إن كره منها خلقا. If he were to dislike a characteristic or an action or a trait in her, رضي منها آخر, then he would find another one that he could be pleased with. أو قال غيره. Or he would say something else if it's considered to be a part of this hadith. We'll stop here, inshallah. We'll continue after Salat al-Isha. Right, so the hadith that we were discussing is hadith 17. It is عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. This is an error. It should be عن أبي هريرة, narrated from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet of Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة. That a believing man should not have hatred instilled in his heart. The reason why I say instilled is because the word farq specifically refers to deep hatred that a person could have. So dislikeness, which is also can be interpreted as like someone hating something as well, is not really intended here. It's someone having deep hatred for someone. مؤمن. A believing man should not have deep hatred for a believing woman. But there's more context here, right? It says إن كره منها خلقا, that if this person were to dislike an action that is, or a characteristic, a quality that is found in that female, رضي منها آخر, then he will find a different quality in her in which he can be pleased, with which he can be pleased. So obviously, just as there are good men and there are bad men, I won't deny that, right? There are also good women and bad women, right? There are women that are that assist their husbands in their life goals. Right? There's not one-sided, obviously. We're not really saying that the husband doesn't do it, right? We're just saying that women that are very assistive of their husbands, they help them throughout their education, they help them with their finances. They help them with the women. They help them with their ambitions. They want to take a leap of faith, start a business. They're supportive with them financially, as we did cover before, right? Or physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever is within the wants and needs of a male. They provide that, and vice versa. The man provides that to the females as well. Right? Regardless of the obligations, more than the obligations. Like just taking care of each other, being your partner, helping you in everything, and just being there for you. Right? Not trying to destroy your family, not trying to destroy your ambitions, not trying to destroy your mental health, which is really important as well. Right? Some woman could be like, well, I don't ask you for your obligations, but she's always complaining about things. Right? That happens. Always. That takes a toll on people's brains, or their mindsets, or minds in general. So, and there are others that are very, very comforting. There are women that a man, when he gets frustrated at work, for example, when he comes back home, he might not be fulfilling his obligations. There is a possibility, right? Or he might be. It doesn't matter. But she cares about him, and she takes care of him. She was like, okay, don't overthink it. It's fine. There's so many better things. Don't feel down, etc. Multiple things. So just as there are females that are good like that, there are also females that would have certain qualities that are not bad. They're not good. So within the parameters of permissibility, this needs to be understood. Within the parameters of permissibility, if there are certain things that a man does not like in a woman, it is not right. It is not permitted based on this hadith, because of the fact that it's a command. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited for a man to have deep hatred due to those reasons. Why would someone have deep hatred for a woman who he's married to? Consistency changes everything, right? Imagine that you are, uh, humiliated in front of people by your wife once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 6 times. How many times can you tolerate? There is a part, or there are certain times when you fall out of love. Whatever love you had, that will be replaced with hatred, naturally so. You'll be like, this woman does not really respect me. You mistakenly humiliated me once in public. Did it again. Did it again. These are hypotheticals, right? In case someone's don't think like too deep. Like it doesn't have to happen in a marriage relationship. You cannot have the strong incentives of like guys get married at the same time, create this boogeyman of a female. They're very like loving creatures, obviously. As sisters that are listening or part of this class, they can attest to the fact that they're all amazing. All right. But there are many people that are happy because of those things. But you can look at other aspects of it. But within the bounds of permissibility, it is not permitted. Shar'an, it is not permitted for a female to humiliate her husband in public and not in public as well, but in public is obviously worse. To tarnish his reputation and do things that are problematic. That could also affect his mental health as well, right? And that is a characteristic that is very problematic. So you should channel that energy towards positive directions. What are the good qualities that this person has? This female has. The only breaking point would be when you would say that the bad characteristics within the parameters of permissibility is what I'm talking about. The bad characteristics inside and outside those parameters outweigh the good characteristics. There is a possibility that happens, right? She cooks amazing food, but when she's pissed off, she's gonna just throw it at you. What I don't understand. Like, what's the point, right? She'll be there for you when you need a ride, but she's the same person who gets pissed off and just drives the car into the wall. You're like, I really, really appreciate you actually giving me a ride. I appreciate that you cook for me too, but I did not have it in me anymore to carry on with the food on the wall, right? And they could be like, well, you know what? You have to learn about the sensitivities of the female side. Right? But it makes perfect sense that what a lot of men go through in terms of dealing is what I mean. See, we're not talking about, we talked about like some females that are bad or not over here. I'm not saying she's necessarily bad. Because in this hypothetical too, we don't really know her side of the story. Because he could be like the one who enjoys food, but he's also the one who actually breaks all the chairs when he's angry, right? So it's just like a give and take relationship that's happening. But I'm talking about like the tolerance and looking at the characteristics. That's also within outside the folds of permissibility. Within the folds of permissibility would be minor things that people get offended by. Like I know a female who told my cousin about this, who's also a female. So my cousin told me this. It's a real story. That this man, who I've met a few times too, no disrespect to him, he came. I was like, this guy seems to be quite strict. He's like, yeah, he's very strict. He's like, yeah, okay. I'm like, well, like, what's an example? Like, just well, you don't know what happened recently. Yeah, it's what? It's like, well, he came home. He was really tired. Understandable. And the food was served. The woman prepared the food. The children were there too, grown children. And like at that time, this is years back, almost 10 years back, they were like 16, 17. And the salt was missing in the food. So he took a bite. I think it was like the guy who sits like at the main spot of the table, right? On the table. So he goes like, he ate it and then he goes, there's a salt. So the woman, she goes like, well, okay, let me just take you back because I had to cook it a little after he was like, no, everybody's gonna eat this right now. It's not a joke. It's like we sat and we ate the food. She was like, it's just a mistake. Like I forgot to put salt in because I was rushing. Because you have like a deadline, right? Like, dude, that's when you come in. 9 o'clock? He's gonna appear. But he was frustrated or whatever. He goes like, no, everyone's gonna eat this food. the whole like family ate the food without any salt in it. Like you can blame yourself. Like yeah, maybe that guy's like because he's being like stubborn about it. Sure, you know. But what about the others? What about the kids? They're like, why do we have to eat this? But it's like, no, everyone's gonna be sitting here. Everyone's gonna eat this. That's like, man, right? It's like I don't get it, to be honest. So let's say that she makes there is a fault in her. A fault in says like she made a mistake, is what I mean, right? She made a mistake. You gotta let go of that mistake and look at other things. Or the other example of like of another man that I know. No disrespect to all the men that are listening, obviously, right? That would always complain about whenever I come at home, the food's not ready, right? So it's like, okay, so why don't you go and speak to her? She should feel that on her own. I'm like, okay, how does that make sense? Right? She should herself know the fact that when a man comes in, he wants food. Coincidentally, most of these examples are about food, right? Because like for men, I guess food is like a big thing, right? Because he's like, okay, you want to get into obligations, so now when I'm providing, you better cook. That's the way he looks at it, right? Or at least a lot of guys look at it. You gotta tell her because if you speak to her, she would say that won't. She's saying that. Well, I don't think he gets bothered by the food cook, right? Because he just comes in and doesn't say anything. And I go, okay, can we order today? They're like, yeah, sure. The guy's like, oh, he's pissed off, and he talks to his boys. And he goes, this woman, whenever I come at home, she doesn't have food cooked and prepared. And, you know, it's just ridiculous. And then years later, he said that it's been so many years, and this woman did not take care of him. And she was like, how does it make sense? Like, I thought you don't have a problem. You're okay with it, right? He's like, no, it's like, that's how it works. Another example, these are like petty things. Like it doesn't make sense for you to hold like women accountable for in a relationship, obviously, right? Because there's accountability on both sides. I need to clarify this again and again because normally whenever I have a discussion about like, well, this side did that, it's immediately for some weird reason understood that the other side is not doing anything. So it's presumed as such, and then it will be said that, well, you know what, he did that. Yeah, sure. We're just talking about one side at this point, right? Or another example of not tolerating something would be not having certain attitudes towards your female relatives, right? That's a big one. So, especially the sister, which makes absolutely no sense. There's no reason why a woman is supposed to be over the top respecting your older sister. Just being straightforward. Because of the fact that you've always like looked at your older sister as like, well, she's the one who we listen to after our mother, and our mother's like the big boss because her father listens to her too. So, and then your wife comes in and she's like, well, you know, she's just like a few years older than me compared to like any of the females. She's like, why should I listen to her? She does something, and the mother's on her side too. In a family where they're all together, right? The mother's on her side too. That has happened, honestly. The mother's on the side too, and then I'm not gonna say they plot, but they definitely have a good like what should I say chemistry. The mother and the daughter, right? And they go like, well, now the brother's gonna be spoken to the son later on, and then she has to deal with it. Is that what happened? Is like, well, they're telling me that you said this and he said this or this. Well, hypothetically, if it happened, she has to have the right. She left everything, and she came to you. She left her environment, her brothers, her sisters, if she had any, or her mother, her father, and it's a complete change. Imagine moving to a place, right, where you cannot move out from, and you never chose anybody. You not except the guy, one guy. That's right. Imagine that. I swear to God, like without any bias, it is a really, really big challenge. Now you have to dress according to whatever they're asking. You have to cook according to whatever they're asking for cooking, or eat according to whatever they're asking you to eat, or behave in like certain patterns that is like culturally considered to be normal. And that could actually take towards having some sort of like dislikeness for certain people. You know, there are families here in Toronto even in which they go like, you have to be sexually intimate at a certain time because you have to be mindful of when you take showers, which makes absolutely no sense.
right? So it's not just like when you're performing the deed, it's also like when you're going to purify yourself, you have to keep it like hush hush in a way that you can't like, you know, overdo it. Who's defining overdoing? The ones who are watching inside the bathroom. Like, okay, how long is it gonna take? So imagine like someone like, okay, I can't take a shower because of her. I can't take a shower because of it. And she dislikes certain things. It's pretty normal. Like from the man's perspective, what needs to be understood here is that she's human. And if she's having a dispute with the female, it's just a dispute with the female. You're not supposed to step in a way that, oh, you know what, like your attack of her is actually attack of mine, and then that's a bad quality of her as a wife. No, it's not. Because there's a good possibility that two good persons can just not get along, isn't it? It's a matter of like just being different. That's not truly a bad quality in a female. It's just that she's different. She's not getting along with someone. So you just look away from that fact and you look at her good deeds, her good actions. This is what it means. إن كره منها خلقا رضي منها آخر. You don't like the fact that she doesn't like your mother. You don't like the fact that she doesn't like your sister. Look at her other good traits. She loves you. That's the main thing. You know, the whole concept of like marriage means like two families are coming together. That's very hard to prove Islamically. The families are related to the people who are coming together. So just as their race came in, and their education came in, and their finances came in, their family came in too. Do you ever say that? I mean, in the pictures, does that make sense? Like they're getting involved, but they're not really directly involved in the sense that you said that, well, marriage is like two families coming together. Not necessarily. The nasab, if you were to look at it from an Islamic perspective, the nasab comes from the father, not from the mother. As for the musahara, like just relationship itself, what do you say in a polygynous relationship? There's like one family that's like sucking off multiple different families. This was that. No, it's just that multiple people are coming together and they're bringing in different things to the table. One of them is their families, their relatives. Does that make sense? Because there are pros and cons for both of these things. There are people who actually don't get married to be other people because of the fact that they don't have certain like family backing them up. That's not Islamic. It doesn't make sense. Not talking about the preference you would have in terms of this when you have like, okay, this is a female and that's a female, they come from different backgrounds. So I'm talking about someone actually disregarded in the community in a way because of the fact that they come from certain backgrounds. What's a good example of that? No? I guess that makes sense. Yeah. That's one example. I'll give you the other one that I had in mind. The example is the fact that you belong to this country and you belong to this country. Or you belong to this city, even happens. And you belong to this city. We're not gangsters. I swear to God, it doesn't make sense. Like, in terms of what background are you talking about? Right? What background are you talking about? And certain made up dichotomies of like nasab. Like actual nasab plays a role, but imagine like you go, yeah, this person, he comes from that tribe, and like you have a misconception about it. One person even told me once, you wouldn't even believe this, is like, there's a good man. He wants to get married to his daughter, right? And I was a part of like the discussion because I was trying to get them married. The man, guess what was his quote unquote nasab? He was a sayyid, right? And this man who had like a perfectly fine daughter, they were compatible. The man was educated, she was educated, everything was perfect, but they were just from like different backgrounds, right? So this man goes to me and it's like I'm still like hesitating a little. I'm like, why? He said because he's a sayyid, and I've heard bad things about sayyids. I'm like, but this man is of a different background, right? Like, he's like, yeah, but what about his family though? I'm like, his lineage goes back to the Prophet alayhi salam. He's like, yeah, but still, you know, I've like the sayyids in this locality. I've heard that these people are into like some dirty business and stuff. I'm like, how sure are you about this? He's like, just, you know, hearsay. Like, but this man has already told you what his occupation is. Like, he's perfectly fine, right? He's a corporate guy. And he too was like, they told him, like, no, we won't be like, not gonna look into this. Just for like what background? Like some random background. Like it doesn't make sense. Just because of the fact that he belonged to the large family of Sayyids, and then some people had like bad experiences with them. Now he gets the blame for it. That makes absolutely no sense. Or converts. So, well, you were talking about is when one big country gets split into like 2 or 3, and then you go like, yeah, not from this part of the border, that part of the border. That makes a lot more sense, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, like in that small world that you live in, maybe there's a great like difference, but in reality, it's just like I don't think that actually mattered. That's not what the kuf discussion is about when it talks about this, right? And there are other like factors too that need to be looked at. Like there's no the issue is of compatibility is what you would use this nasab reason to actually make sense of things or not. Does that make sense? Especially for like converts too, I would say. There's no such thing in Islam that you're not supposed to marry converts. Does that make sense? So the man's thinking about how many bodies she's had, right? But his actual issue is, oh, the nasab does not. How do you expect a convert to be related to the Prophet? Like, I don't understand this. What nasab is she gonna have? And what's the one you prefer? Someone who's a 5th generation non-Hindu, an Indian background female, and whose great grandfather, or perhaps above that, was just a Hindu trader who converted. So lines down, they get purified. That's not what's happening. Everyone knows that. Or even worse, some of them actually bring in racism. Right? Honestly, I've actually heard people use this as an excuse. They're like, well, one person actually said, this is a learned person. They go like, well, why don't we get into polygyny? He's like, yeah, let's get into polygyny. And this was actually said as a joke, but obviously you know how you like some people they act funny and they say whatever they want to say. That I want to be polygynous, but our community does not allow it. Right? His community, whatever. He was from an Indian background. And it says that, well, certain females from certain communities, and they happen to be from a different race, they allow it. Right? They're kind of comfortable when it comes to that. I mean, everyone knows it. Like, North African countries, a lot of them, Nigerian, from Senegal too, they're actually very comfortable when it comes to like polygyny. The females themselves. Like, I think of a female here from like any of our cities, from New York or like Toronto or anywhere, and they speak to like a Nigerian female, they'll be on 2 different like pages altogether about what this religion says. Because they come from like polygamous backgrounds too. Their brothers have multiple wives, their parents have multiple wives, etc. So he goes like, why don't you marry into that like culture? He goes like, yeah, they're not our kuf. I swear to God, the man said that and laughed about it. I was like, you're just indirectly saying that I would not marry someone who's black, right? What else are you talking about? Like, what? I don't get it. Like, because of the fact that 4 or 5 generations down, you're not worshiping idols anymore. That makes you someone better. I don't get it. How does it make sense? It doesn't. If you have personal dislike towards something, you need therapy. Honestly, something definitely tainted you. Maybe you were like in Melbourne or somewhere at some point. You got beat up multiple times, and then you start like hating certain people. That's probably what happened. Nasab is taken into consideration, but there's proper parameters for it to be taken into consideration. It's not supposed to be thrown around like that. It's just like, guess what? Hirfa, occupation, is also supposed to be taken into consideration, right? But how many times do we compromise? Because the fact that we're able to see compatibility. There's not like stark differences in a way that would very obviously be a case of compatibility not being there. The reason why I'm not giving examples for that, because everyone's case is different. Someone could be like, yeah, that profession is in direct conflict with what my profession is, right? And that's why, even though I have like, okay, you say you have another suitor, and he's exactly the same as this person, but I don't think that this will cause a lot of conflicts, and I have no feelings attached from with any of these people, or no other form of preference. Then it's possible that those things are taken into consideration, but people don't even talk about it. all they do is like whether the finances are good or not, right? So the compatibility is the main issue. There is no such thing as that there's actual levels of race compatibility. It cannot be backed up, even if some people have written on it in books of fiqh. It cannot be backed up. The certain races will have, like, what's the proof for it? What do you think? If it's coming down to personal like discretion, then it's a cultural thing. If a person was like, yeah, we've seen the people from these backgrounds and people from those backgrounds, they don't get well together. So these things need to be looked at and compatible to do. Yeah. Well, when they moved on, they live together in one society, and they're okay with it, and they grew up together. Then you cannot use that card anymore because they're comfortable with each other. Am I making sense? The only minor difference would be like, yeah, you call this that. It's like, yeah, we call this that. That's it, isn't it? Yeah. As for growing up being someone who has like racist tendencies, then that's something else altogether, right? That's actually, that doesn't even have the race backgrounds. That actually has like those cultural backgrounds too. Like people who come from like backgrounds of like say hypothetically Afghanistan, they would not marry certain people from certain areas. They're like, not those guys. Those guys are not real Afghans, is what they're saying. Like, or others, you know. Coincidentally, like in the Emirates, there's a lot of cases where a lot of like Arabs, they have wives. Their second wives are usually the ones that are from Indian backgrounds. It's very common. If I'm not mistaken, in Kuwait too, it's kind of common too, right? So the second wife, in chronologically speaking, the second wife is from like a non-Arab background because it's harder for them to convince females from those backgrounds, and their models are also not that high, right? Because they convert. But that does not mean that, okay, why couldn't it happen the first time? What happened to the compatibility at that time? Right? Those things need to be looked at properly. Like it has to be individual cases. Anyways, we moved away from what we were originally talking about. That is I guess it could be applicable to this too, right? If she comes from a different background and she has certain traits that you're just like, I don't like this about that background. Yeah, but she is more than that. She is a person. So you have to look at positive things. The motivation over here is to look away from negative things and look at positive things. No one's going to be devoid, except if someone is like really evil. Can't put like a blanket statement like that, right? There are people who are actually very, very evil, abusive, and evil people. There are women out there that actually hit their husbands, harm them physically. Seriously. This is like staring at me. There are women out there who actually physically harm their husbands. That's completely unlawful, right? You can't take advantage of the fact that a husband's like, okay, you know what, I will make sure this doesn't happen again, move forward. No, that's actually evil, isn't it? How can you actually harm your husband like that? Physically harm him. May Allah save us from such evil. But within the parameters of permissibility, you should look at more positive things. So those little things, as well as some things that might be more problematic, such as missing prayer. That's between her and Allah. Right. But obviously that is a debate. There is a debate about that. There's a difference opinion whether you can actually take reject or not. I do incline towards the opinion that that's between her and Allah. You can obviously advise her to be on the right path, but that's not something that should be causing a relationship to be problematic. Then obviously the factor of not listening to you that comes in, that should play a role, right? If that makes sense. Whether her religious behavior can be separated or not. This is a very, I don't think this question is, it says, does a man have to pray in the mosque? Okay, that's a very unrelated question. But we'll look at it later. What's the connection? That's a question about Jama'ah. Yeah. Huh? No, I'm going to show Salah because so, no, a good example would be when she uses like certain tones that are that might feel disrespectful to you, right? Now again, this is not a pass for females to be like, it's like You know, your sheikh said that I can use certain tones, and you should be looking at other good qualities in mine. No, I mean like sometimes it's possible that you're having a discussion and then it gets heated, and then she might say a few things right here and there. Well, you know what? Like you're not even like think or something, and the guy might not like it. You gotta like let it pass. Like if she's angry, she said this. You can tell her obviously that I do not appreciate you saying this to me. Maybe talk about it later, but don't like be stuck on it. And but you have to realize that it's not a robot, right? You are the word qawam is like thrown around quite a bit. In fact, I just read today someone said that well, I think the word qawam refers can also be applied to wearing sunnah clothes. I'm like, you just make it more and more vast as to like what a man is supposed to do. You just keep adding put like a qawam there. Right? And then the questions, stories about people started that way after 9/11. I started wearing, these clothing because of my mother. And I'm like, okay, what does that do with the word qawam? I don't get it, right? But qawam just means, according to them, it's like the guy who just comes in and he goes like this, and everyone's looking at him, and then it's like, whoa, qawam. So, that's not what it means. Or like the man. Like a lot of it is like red pill stuff, unfortunately, stuff like under the guise of uh, religiosity or religious discussions, unfortunately. But there's you have to be someone who's soft, right? And softness requires connecting it back to the hadith of our the research of the meeting that we did. That khiyarukum, what did it say? Altafukum or altafuhum bi ahli. That is the person who's the best is the one who's the nicest to his wives and his family. So nice. At the same time, you have to maintain parameters too. Is the guy who gets physically abused considered to be nice? If he goes like, okay, that's that. Okay, I didn't really enjoy it, but like yeah, right. But you're right though. I did deserve a little punch at that time on my back or something like that, right? Yeah, I kind of deserve that plate that you took at me. Right, I'm understanding. That makes no sense. The abuse is abuse, whichever side it comes from. Right? That's clear. The next hadith, this is narrated by Muslim and Ahmed, by the way, the hadith of cover. Hadith 18 is a very interesting one, and it relates to, well, a lot of the brothers who are now married and sisters too. They're probably wondering that, okay, like what's going on? Let's look at something that you might be more relatable for you, brothers and sisters. Seeing your partner before marriage. And there are a lot of misconceptions related to this as well. Let's look at the hadith. عن المغيرة بن شعبة is narrated from المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه قال أتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم I came to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم فذكرت له امرأة أخطبها. So I mentioned a female to the Prophet عليه السلام that I'm proposing to. Right? فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم اذهب فانظر إليها. The Prophet عليه السلام mentioned that go look at her. فإنه أجدر أن يقدم بينكما, because it is more likely or more deserving for you to have compatibility present among you. Right? From the Hamza, Dal, Mim base letters, which tells you it's like things going well together. Like a condiment they use like to make things taste better, etc. What is it called? Idam. So things they use, like let's say you have bread, and then you use like certain things like butter or fat sometimes in old like examples, or different condiments. What do you call it? Possibly gravy or what else is there? Like sauces, right? Different sauces you use. They make your them go well together. Like if you're having sauce on your own, like you're like you gotta have it with something else. When you're having that thing, you're like, I wish I had some sauce with this, right? Like how they go well together. So that compatibility is found. Now you think about it, compatibility as a general term, as well as the kuf discussion, the legal compatibility that we talked about, which is there to for females to have a stronger support system, right? Like as in they would be like, okay, these are the things that need to be looked at for when a female is getting married. But what does looking have to do with it? Because compatibility is a lot more vast. compatibility is a lot more vast. It doesn't always have to have illegal backing in a way that you go like, well, the Sharia has mentioned these 6 things or made 6 major things of kufr as well, of legal compatibility. So I'm just using that card. No, your personal preference should be pointed out as personal preference, and there's nothing wrong with that. Does that make sense? If you're not physically attracted, that's what I was talking about when I said before that, okay, there is a possibility that someone's more physically attracted to certain races and not the others, right? Just to be realistic, to be honest. People are like, no, everyone's like the same. Yeah, sure, that's the way you look at it, right? But there are a lot of guys who don't think this way. There are a lot of girls who don't think this way. That's how you have preference. Does that make sense? If it's based on racist tendencies or not, we don't have time to figure that out. We gotta get married before that, right? Possibly. But the point is that someone finding some sort of preference. But looks do play a role. Does that make sense? Looks do play a role. So when we went through the hadith, that is, تنكح المرأة لأربع, that is, woman is married for 4 reasons. One of them is لجمالها. So I brought in the discussion that is it okay to look at the beauty of a female, or do you have to focus on the religiosity only? And I said that religiosity is always going to get the priority, right? But you can look at the beauty of the female too, so that there's more compatibility. This hadith and all its recensions, with all its recensions, supports that. But what else would you get out of it when you look at her? Right? If you want to see her, what else are you going to get? What are you going to get out of it? All right, Mal, Jamal, Hasab, and Deen. These are the 4 things why a female is married, right? A female is married for 4 reasons. Which of these 4 would you actually be able to exhibit properly? Beauty. And it's completely fine. فأتيت امرأة من الأنصار. المغيرة بن شعبة, he mentioned that I went to a woman of Ansar then. فخطبتها إلى أبويها. And I went to both of her parents, the father and the mother. Right, guys? You know this whole thing that happens of like only females taking part in the marriage, etc. The fathers are right there, Islamically. The fathers need to be more involved, or at least equally involved in this process for both sides of the son and the daughter. And I told them, so those 2, the father and the mother, he told, obviously that's the only possibility there, right? That he told them, Mughirah ibn Shu'bah told them what the Prophet ﷺ said, go and look at the female. فَكَأَنَّهُمَا كَرِهَا ذَلِكَ. It was as if they were not really comfortable with him looking at the daughter. قال فسمعت ذلك المرأة. So that was heard by the female while this discussion was going on. وهي في خدرها, while she was still, behind her veil. Whatever veil was like, keeping her separate. She was segregated, right? Like she heard Al-Mughirah ibn Shu'bah say that the Prophet ﷺ has said, go and look at her, the female that you're proposing to. فقالت إن كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمرك أن تنظر فانظر. She said that when the Prophet ﷺ has told you, he's instructed you to go and look, then look. Right? وإلا فأنشدك. It's like, if not, then I urge you, just stop here. كأنها أعظمت ذلك. It is as if that this was like a great deal for her. Like, let's just, like you guys are disputing over this. If the Prophet ﷺ said, look. قال فنظرت إليها فتزوجتها فذكر من موافقتها. So then the narrative that is Al-Mughirah ibn Shu'bah, the companion said that, so I looked at her then, because the Prophet ﷺ allowed it, and also mentioned the fact that she also agreed to marry him, because they saw each other, obviously. Does that make sense? Now, what's interesting is that the discussion going on, and the females in the conversation too. How are these people sounding more flexible or more tolerating than a lot of our backgrounds? I don't understand this. Then Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah turned away and goes like, whoa, why are you talking when the big boys are talking? Right? The girl is not supposed to speak, actually. In fact, they say that her suhoot is considered to be consent. That's what a good girl is. That does not even say, yes, I accept, because she's so shy. What about her? She's like, you know what? If the Prophet ﷺ told you to look, why don't you just look? That's what she said. Right? And it's complete money's like, okay, I'll marry this female. It has to come down to like personal preferences. Don't like drag these legal points that you're picking up on and try to generalize and be like, yeah, a woman is supposed to be like this. No, if it doesn't come explicitly from the Prophet ﷺ, then there's no such thing. Does that make sense? Some people are looking for like more traditional women. And that's like you're just kind of putting a cap on like the way you look at certain females and how like, just be like, okay, there's a preference that I'm waiting for. Good. I guess like they have to say it somehow, right? Okay, good, fair enough. Look, just do it. But you do know that you're not traditional, right? So she has to go in that direction too. One person I know I met here, and he's like, I think in his, I know a lot of people say, we'll figure out, hopefully, right? He's like in his, at that time, he was like in his late 20s or something. So he was like, we were talking, and then he was like, oh, I gotta get married. I'm like, yeah, you should, right? It's like, but the problem is that all the girls that I meet here, they're all liberal. That's what it is. All the girls that I meet, there's something wrong. They're all liberal. In my heart, I was just like, I definitely don't want to be that guy who's like define liberalism, right? This stuff, but I'm pretty sure it's like it has to do with you saying that. Well, this is what Islam says. She goes like, does it though? Liberal. That's what it is. Honestly. Like you can't back up a lot of the stuff you're saying. You know that statement that I mentioned right now, that a woman is supposed to, a silent woman is a good woman, is what some people say. It's based on the fact that the sukut equals to Allah, because that shows like an ideal woman. No, it doesn't. Like that's not what the fiqh issue is telling you. There is a possibility that some of them might not speak, so they go, okay, so is it possible for her consent to be taken when she's not saying anything, or are we just gonna wait there because she's crying? There are women like that, right? That do that too, but that does not really tell you an idealistic female. Idealistic females, if that's the case, then what about the other cases that I mentioned there too, especially that come in the Hadith of the Prophet in the times of the Sahaba, Muslims. If it's normal for them to exist and them to be acceptable by the best of the creation after Prophet Muhammad or sorry, the best of the Ummah after Prophet Muhammad then they're a part of it too. They're just different. You have to accept that fact. You have to accept the fact that men can be different, women can be different, and different backgrounds does not make one ignorant or the opposite of it, liberal. They just have different understandings of certain things. Whether you can find someone that's on the same page as you, good for you. If not, no. And if there's a possibility, like, yeah, they might have those views, but I'm kind of okay with it because they have the right to have their own views, right? And there will be no conflict because I'm like, okay. Contrary to the other extreme, that well, even if you have certain jurisprudential differences, the marriage will be a disaster later. That makes no difference. That makes no sense, and it does not make any difference. All right, well, so imagine this woman is from the time of the Sahaba, married by Mughira ibn Shu'bah. The parents are talking. I'm not saying that idealistically you would actually go and start like talking, right, when the talks are going on. But I'm saying that it was considered to be something that's like, he didn't go like, no, you know what did you do? You were not supposed to speak. The parents and I was speaking. Your wali was speaking, and the being the one, the khitbah who was speaking. Why is she intervening? And then the parents couldn't do anything. The parents were uncomfortable with it. And what did she do? She said, well, the Prophet ﷺ said this, right? So this should happen. This is amazing. Because everyone's actually going towards whatever the Prophet ﷺ said. Does that make sense? This is narrated by Ibn Majah and also Ahmed. One of the narrators of this hadith is Bakr ibn Abdullah al-Muzani. And his Sama'atu al-Mughira, there's a khilaf about that. So I had to point this out, due to which some people have said that the chain of transmission might not be okay for this narration, but there are many corroborated chains for not the same event, but at least at the same time instruction related from the Prophet ﷺ. They're referred to as in Hadith nomenclature as shawahid. Like many other narrations come from the Prophet ﷺ where he has emphasized that a man should look at the woman before, or the guy should look at the girl before they get married, and that is something that enforces or makes better or allows you to see more compatibility related matters or factors before you get married to the female. So one of those recensions that are similar to this is the narration of Muhammad ibn Maslama, in which is related خطبت امرأة, narrated by Ibn Majah, says that I proposed to a female, فجعلت أتخبأ لها. What does that mean? I started, just being around her in a way that I'll be able to see her. I think that's a good way to translate it, because it could be translated as like I started stalking, right? حتى نظرت إليها في داخل الله, to the extent that I was finally able to see her when she was, under a date palm tree that belonged to her family or herself. So he kind of was finding ways to be able to look at her, right? So he proposed to a female, or like the proposal was in its initial phases, and he was like, "Let me have a look at her," right? And then, he found her at a date palm tree, and he was like, "فقيل له أتفعل هذا وأنت صاحب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم?" He's like, "You do things like that, and you're a companion of the Prophet. Look, you're actually taking sneak peeks of like females that you want to get married to." فقال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول, the narration says that he said, that I heard the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم say, إذا ألقى الله في قلب امرئ خطبة امرأة. If Allah Ta'ala puts in the heart of a male that he should propose to a female, regardless of whether it's his first marriage or second or third or fourth, whatever, may Allah allow us to have the ones that we deserve, right? فلا بأس أن ينظر إليه. And there's nothing wrong in this person to look at her, right? If Allah puts in a man's heart that he can look at he should propose to a female, that he wants to get married to a female, then there's nothing wrong in looking at the female that he would like to get married to. Does that make sense? Now, look at the other part that I wanted to point out, is that certain people think that religiosity is that if you don't look at the female. Unfortunately, that does exist, which is contrary. Now, I'm not going to say it's against the Sunnah. Discuss that with someone else. It's definitely permitted. And anyone who's saying that some sort of religiosity is established over that, they need proof to establish that. The proof for the permissibility of looking at the female is there. There are multiple narrations, including the first one that I talked about. What the difference opinion regarding one of the narrators hearing from Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah or not. Otherwise, the reliability of the narrators is definitely confirmed, right? So either individually or collectively, the narration is authentic. The instruction from the Prophet ﷺ is established. It shows at the very least the permissibility of it, if not the recommendation of it. So for someone to say that piety is in not looking further, they need to substantiate that through proper evidence. There is no evidence for that. That piety. Even that's like a loose term. I don't know how to define that properly, especially the people who use it don't know how to define it properly. Right? If you're closer to Allah, how do you prove that you get closer to Allah if you were not to look at the view? Some people argue and they say that, well, it's a sunnah, so you will get closer if you were to look. I'm saying both of you need to bring and properly establish your proofs that what brings you closer to God. We're not talking about what brings you closer to God. We're talking about what's permitted or not. Right? It's completely fine or not. It's completely fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, now appropriation-wise, like if you look at the aspect that, okay, I do want to look at the female and the jamal can be taken into consideration, just as the mal and the hasab / the nasab or the khuluq can be taken into consideration too. You remember these words? Hasab, nasab, status, lineage, and jamal is our beauty, and kamal, not kamal. Mal is kamal is wealth, right? And khuluq was her demeanor or her characteristics, her adat, like her practices, habits, etc. All those things can be taken into consideration. We're normal people, so act normal. The only thing that we have is being obsessed with religion, right? Religion in a good way, like the religious OCD sort of thing, right? It's like a religion is given precedence over everything else, and we're proud of that. Some people think it's a mental health issue that you always think about religion on top, above everything else. The main decisive factor is religion. Some people associated this with mental health issues, which is completely nonsensical. It's a personal choice that we have. Does the personal choice at one point become like a part of us in a way that we wanted to inactively be active, right? Or subconsciously be active? That makes more sense. Yes. Why not? Right? One of the examples that are given is like when certain people pick up certain things and think that, oh, I must do this. That's one of the examples that are given. And that's actually a good thought. Not someone who's actually going through a mental health issue of like, okay, you're just overthinking certain issues, but whether you are picking up and taking someone else's things in and of itself or in generic terms is not a bad thing. It's actually being mindful of the fact that Allah is always watching you. Right? So we give precedence to religiosity or religion over everything else, but other things are also enjoyed and looked at by us. There are proper narrations that support this from the Prophet. Does that make sense? Now, the only issue over here would be that there is no evidence that suggests that any of the part of the ayah, if this narration or these narrations are considered to be before the revelation of the hijab, but there's no evidence that suggests that any part of the ayah the female will see. Right? But even if there was, it could be understood as like this was before the revelation of the hijab. But in our context, because of the fact that the rules of hijab did come down, it will only be permitted from the aspect of those people who allow in certain situations the face to be seen, right? And there'll be the discussion of the fact that whether the face veil is considered to be relatively mandatory or not, etc., or in certain situations or not. They allow the looking of the face, obviously, right? And the hands too. But, however, if someone coincidentally sees the female, like the narration that we mentioned that he was able to see the female thing, and that causes an attraction, hypothetically, there's a possibility, right? Can that be turned into marriage? Yes, why not? Why not? There's no such thing as, things that are initiated in a haram way will always end in a haram way. That does not make sense. That does not make sense. That's what certain people in which, they say that they've committed zina, for example, right? Does that make sense for them to get married or not? Yes. In fact, they should get married so everyone else is safe from them. No disrespect. I'm serious. Because I'm being fair here. Like they're actually saying that, should we get married to each other? And we already know that we committed zina, versus some person who's actually chaste and we should fool them. And it's not really mandatory to tell them we committed zina, right? Why is that person getting that? I don't get it. Like, okay, get married now. But technically speaking, the hadith that is لم يرى للمتحابين مثل النكاح أو مثل النكاح, there is no thing is better than marriage for those people who fall in love. That does not really stipulate that the falling in love has to be within the parameters of Sharia or not. So let's say that someone fell in love and there were certain things that were done that were haram. May Allah save us from it. But if it was done, that does not ruin the relationship. That means that make it legit and halal as soon as possible. Am I making sense? Does everyone understand what I'm saying? Like there is no such thing. Some manipulative people, that actually use this as an excuse. Unfortunately, we live in a place where a lot of women get manipulated into believing that, well, you know what? There's a proposal, and then the man messes around with the female, and they'll be like, well, it got haram, so it got ruined. So, sorry, can't get married. One of the most foolish things I've ever heard, if it's real, but it's definitely something, there's no better way to explain it except saying that it's whack. Honestly, like it doesn't make sense. It's just like a cop-out. It doesn't make sense if that happens. So if, hypothetically, this is like a very bad level, right? But if someone were to, let's say, mistakenly, let's say that they are living in the same household, and the female, hypothetically, she was not fully covered, and the man gets a glimpse of her, and he likes her. This is completely normal. To have feelings is completely normal, right? And the person goes like, yeah, I would like to get married to her. There's nothing wrong with that. That makes sense. But if it's being constructed in a way that, well, okay, now I would like to see the female, then it's not permissible for a man to look at the aura of the female. If that makes sense. So if like a proposal happens, for example, it's not permissible for a man to look at the aura of the female. So you look at the face. The face is, according to the majority, not considered to be aura, or it will be considered to be an exception in this case, right? But the meeting itself happens. The meeting tells you of just the demeanor, the body language, or it doesn't have to be like, oh, and gone, right? You have to know who the person is. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, yeah, she just showed me like a good side, and people have their good sides. So when they're taking pictures, they go, wait, like, just take the side on the other side. So what if they go like, well, let me show like this side? Like, you gotta see like different lightings. So that's a joke. Obviously, you have to be like, can you turn off that light a little? So, but I would say definitely have satisfaction to that extent. There's no actual cap on it. There's no actual parameters for it. It has to be 5 minutes. It has to be 10 minutes. It has to be half an hour. There's no proof of that. The only thing is like you looked at somebody properly. You met that person because it would most likely or most appropriately would happen in the presence of a mahram of the female, right? And they will, because khalwa between a female and a male is not permitted. So in that case also, that's why he, according to this narration, it established that he was just finding ways to be able to look at her, right? And then he finally saw her, so I said, okay, And but what was said was like, you do something. So people like that were over there at that time too. It's like, wait, you're doing this and you're a companion of the Prophet. So he was like, yeah, I heard the Prophet said that you can do it. Permissibility is okay, brothers. This needs to be understood too. Permissibility is not to be used against you. It's to be used for you. We've reached a point where permissible things have been brought down to like things you're not supposed to do, unpreferred, non-preferred things, and recommendations have taken the place of permissibility, which is super strange. So if you're not doing something that has some sort of like emphatic statement or something to back it up as like a preferred thing, people think that you're doing something wrong. If you choose the permissible things, people think you're doing something wrong. It's not wrong, but everyone's different. Not everyone's supposed to be, on some next level preference mode. Everyone's different. Everyone chooses their own good. That makes sense. So some people are able to do certain things that are more preferred than others, and like I still feel just some people more than others, right? More than other things that could be seen. So what you have to do is you have to have a positive mindset. You encourage people to do good things, but as long as the person is within the folds of permissibility, let them be. So they're able to easily go towards the other things. So if they're always guilt tripping themselves over things that are permissible, it affects people's mental health too. People don't understand. It's like they kind of feel like they always have this understanding of I'm not even a good person. 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 Not in a way that a person is challenging his own actions to be better, but in a way that he goes no matter how much I try, I will not be a good person. Because he's stuck at that impermissible state of this, right? Definitely there are other people who would not go through this, but I definitely know the people do go through this. And they have this longing for hey, I wish I could do that, etc. But if the person is more mentally stable, as in, okay, these are permitted actions, am I doing anything wrong? Would I go to hellfire? It's no, you're not going to hellfire. Okay. And then, should I make my path in the hereafter better? Is the question that he will have at a more healthy place, from a more healthy place. That place would make him do recommendations in a better way. A healthy-minded person would perform recommendations in a better way than a person who you're constantly demonizing over doing permitted actions. The reason why Allah permitted them is because they're permitted. It's completely fine to do them. The reason why recommendations are better is because they're above whatever is permitted. So you're not only just making the guy feel, worse than how he would feel. You're also making the guy who's better feel worse. Because then the guys who are doing recommendations, you're well, That's not that much. This guy, he stays up all night. It's like, yeah, but like, yeah, like everybody prays all the sunnahs and all the nafs. This man, never seen a woman in his life. So okay, if one's doing like before marriage, I mean, like, you get my point. It's like, and obviously he's seen his mother and his sisters and etc. Well, like they would praise someone. So it's like, never seen one. Yeah, good, but that's not achievable for this person. So he might look into other things, right? But it's supposed to be understood relatively. The main point I'm making is that permitted or permissible actions should not be looked down at. Alhamdulillah, that a person is not falling into haram and those actions that are considered problematic. If you were like, there are people who actually say that. If you were like, it's permitted, it's like, yeah, it's permitted, but it's not the sunnah though. So you're like, okay, so is the sunnah considered over here like a recommendation or not? Like, what's the legal ruling related to it? The legal ruling needs to be understood here. The legal rulings is what it's what decides your legal consequence in the hereafter. Not the fact whether it's a sunnah or not. This needs to be understood. Because there's not even a single soul on planet Earth that is fulfilling every single sunnah on planet Earth. Or that could be like uncovered. Am I making sense? There are points when a person goes like, okay, let's do this one and not that one. So what's a good example that I gave you? Ankih wa talliq. That's the best example. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that from my sunnah is to marry and to divorce. How many of us do not divorce? Alhamdulillah. Isn't it? Does that mean that now you have to do that sunnah? It doesn't mean that. There are certain sunnahs that are not supposed to be done. People need to understand this. It sounds really bad when you put it like this. But what's being understood is that, okay, yeah, it's supposed to be relative too. Supposed to be relative. So for someone to be in a situation where he goes like, well, I'm not going to divorce you, he's like, why? He's like, well, it is still, you understand that the Prophet has done it too, right? It is sunnah. So if that woman does not want to stay with you, she doesn't want to be with you anymore. And the only hurdle that you have is that you're not fulfilling her obligation, or whatever the situation is when you feel that the female is oppressed. Then you said, okay, let her, go. You're not doing an action that is unlawful because it's established from the Prophet ﷺ too. Does that make sense? There are certain sunnahs that many people in knowledge have mentioned that are actually makruh from within the fold of makruhat, regular people. Certain things, sunnahs, in the sense that it's late established martabat of the sunnahs, like what established from the Prophet ﷺ, what in the most generic sense, not the sunnah that needs to be followed. Does that make sense? Does everyone understand what I'm saying? It needs to be understood in a relative way. The hadith after this is about female partners and the Prophet ﷺ's advice towards them. So, it says عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال استوصوا بالنساء خيرا. That is advise women with goodness. This is a command that is towards males. The Prophet ﷺ has singled out women and singled out men in terms of the ones who will give good advice or take good care. That is, men are supposed to take good care of women. This applies across the board. It applies to mothers, applies to sisters, and definitely applies to your wives. Why? Because you're the main person now, right? She left everything for you, and she's living with you, and she's still someone who was like in gentle care of her parents. So you're supposed to be careful with her. You have to take a lot of care with her. فَإِنَّهُنَّ خُلِقْنَا مِنْ ضِلَعٍ, because of the fact that they were created from a rib. It's very interesting. وَإِنَّ أَعْوَجَ شَيْءٍ فِي الضِّلَعِ أَعْلَاهُ, and the most crooked portion or part of the ribs is the top part of it. Right? فَإِنْ ذَهَبْتَ تُقِيمُهُ كَسَرْتَهُ. If you're going to go about trying to make it straight, تُقِيمُهُ, make it straight, كَسَرْتَهُ, you will break it. وَإِنْ تَرَكْتَهُ لَمْ يَزَلْ أَعْوَجَ. But if you were to not do anything good, and you just leave it as she is, she will stay, or it will stay crooked. So it's like a dilemma that you have. So what's the solution? فاستوصوا بالنساء خيرا. That keep taking care of them, keep advising them positively. Positive advice. Keep reminding them of whatever you've learned, which is why I would say that people who are learned are better suitors for those people who are not that learned. I'm telling you, everything just comes down to knowledge at the end of the day. How much knowledge you have of nikah, how much knowledge you have of talaq, how much knowledge you have. I'm talking about religious knowledge, which is why the opposite that exists is kind of strange. When people think that people of knowledge, I mean, they have done a lot to create their reputation too. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of cases in which people of knowledge, quote unquote, people of knowledge, have physically, mentally, or even financially, possibly, if they're able to abuse their partners, their female partners, right? Unfortunately, so they've had a bad reputation, at least in some circles. But truly, just knowledge itself is from the sifat, as many of those sulis have mentioned too, from the sifat, from those qualities that are intrinsically good. Intrinsically good. They just lead towards goodness. So if the man has this knowledge, he's not going to try to break it. So this is what I mean. People think knowledge is like, it's the fact that he's not practicing on his knowledge that's what's problematic. Right? But what if someone does not even have that knowledge? Right? Like, what's the main incentive for him to be good towards females? He's a Muslim and he does not even know that the Prophet ﷺ has said this about the females. The other one who actually might have read this hadith in al-Bukhari or Muslim and then he forgot it. So either way, they're not practicing on what the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned to us. That you have to be out of your way, kind and nice towards females. See, have you noticed how many times, how many narrations altogether, this is the 19th one, how much emphasis the Prophet ﷺ has put on the fact that you have to be extra caring and extra gentle towards females. Not talking about the abusive ones. I have to always put that on because I'm like, aha. So that means that I can start punching and yelling at my husband and he just has to be like, okay, I just have to be gentle. Right? That makes absolutely no sense. Obviously. Right? Not talking about abusive. Just as we talk about being obedient or being submissive to your husband, that does not mean that we're talking about abusive husbands. I'm serious. Not that I'm saying the submission needs to be negated from it, but I'm saying that a female would want to leave that relationship, not that she will continue that. Right? That he would be like, yeah, well, I want to punch you, come here. She's like, okay, I have to obey you, so. Right? Can she run away from that situation? Obviously she can. Similarly, like a woman too. Like when we're expecting that, that we're someone that we have to be extra gentle, extra kind, that would be someone who's normal. And normal does not mean perfect. This needs to be understood here. It's like I'm talking about like average, normal, whatever a female is like. I'm telling you, they're beautiful creatures. They need to be taken care of. Right? Like they might have certain things. They might be like, there are certain things that some people say, I hate it when you do this. Right? Like this. It's like, I hate it when you do this. Like, but like, لا يفرق مؤمن المؤمنة. You should not hate the female herself, but I hate her actions. You're like, yeah, رضي منها آخر. That he would be okay with any other good thing that he can look at. Right? So you have to particularly focus on positive things. Another narration that can خياركم خياركم لنسائكم. The best of you is the best of you towards your females. Look at these narrations that come. ألطفهم بأهله. The one who is the kindest to his females, his wives, sorry. And this narration is استوصوا بالنساء خيرا. Do you find these narrations come towards males? They don't come towards males. They're always emphasizing the fact that you have to take care of the females. روى البخاري ومسلم. This is narrated from Bukhari and Muslim. رحمه الله. واللفظ للأول, and the wording belongs to Sahih al-Bukhari. وفي رواية لمسلم, and there is a narration from Muslim. إن المرأة خلقت من ضلع لن تستقيم لك على طريقة. That the female is created from a rib, right? Or a bone from rib. A rib cage, I guess rib, so rib, several bones. لن تستقيم. you will never be able to make her straight. لك على طريقة, in a specific way that you want. Does that make sense? Through whatever ways possible. وإن استمتعت بها استمتعت بها وبها عوج. If you are enjoying that female, enjoy her as she is, even with the crookedness that she has. وإن ذهبت تقيمها كسرتها. And if you want to make her straight, see, this is the point. Like, you have to understand that this is not really negating any form of positive changes. It's saying that make it straight, like contrary to what it can be. Right? There's going to be a point that you reach and you would say, well, beyond this, she's just a female. That's just the way she is. That's how females are. That's how they act, whatever. Not talking about better or worse over here. No, like sort of like comparison of that sort. I'm just talking about the fact that how people act. Right? Certain characteristics that are attributed towards being females or being males. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling you that, well, okay, they do come crooked, like a rib. Don't try to make it straight. Don't try to make them, this is obviously a comparison from which you understand that don't try to make them what they're not. Does that make sense? So you keep pushing and you want her exactly how you want her to be. That does not make sense. But at the same time, you would also constantly advise them or take care of them in a good way. And if you can actually live a life with them in a way that she has iwaj, that she is crooked, that's fine too. Just deal with it properly. And if you were to make her straight, it says that if you were to make her straight, that will lead to a divorce. If you make her straight, right? Straight over here, this should not be interpreted as, this is what I pointed out, it's a comparison. The straighting part should not be compared as like being straight in the sense of good in conduct. Obviously, good in conduct is required. Straight, this person is like straight and they don't do anything wrong. That's not what it means. Straight compared to a rib cage being crooked, as the way it cannot be. A rib cannot be straight. It's not going to be straight, if that makes sense, right? So don't try to make it what it's not. In fact, keep advising positively. The best thing that a Muslim can do, keep reminding himself before everyone else, and herself too, of the prophetic narrations. Anything. The Prophet ﷺ has spoken very vastly on marriage relationships. Keep reminding her of the different verses and the different hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ. I'll come to the questions later, inshallah. There are a few questions here. Would it also mean trying to make her a potential? It could mean that, yeah, definitely. That actually makes sense, because if it falls down, if it falls under something that is leading towards compatibility. If I'm not misunderstanding that refers to like before marriage, if someone were to see certain qualities and they would say that certain increase in those qualities would make you more compatible to me. If that's what is intended by it, then yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. Because it's talking about nisa in general, right? That just keep on advising them positively advising them until they become better, right? But there is always going to be a part of them that you cannot change, so you have to be mindful of that. That's the point. Not in a bad way necessarily, just being different, just not being a guy. A guy acts differently, thinks differently, however you want to. I don't want to get into that discussion, but a Muslim guy, I should say. A Muslim guy and a Muslim woman, they act differently. I think that's that we can say that at least, right? They act differently. They anyone who wants to do whatever they want to do, it's none of my business, right? Anyways, no, I don't want to get into that discussion. But a Muslim guy and a Muslim woman, a girl, they act in a certain way, and it makes sense for certain things to be found in them that could be corrected. So if someone is, let's say hypothetically, someone is more inclined towards females that are learned, right? So if they advise them, it's like, yeah, you should learn more. You should learn more. And they would find more compatibility in that, it's completely fine. And after marriage, it should be understood that, let's say hypothetically, someone's like advising them to, be in a certain way around them. It needs to be done positively.
right? So like, I mean, like everyone was married, they probably went through it already, but whenever the first time is, it's not easy to tell your wife how should she have her makeup, right? I mean, some women could be easier than others, but I promise you that there are many women who don't like the fact that if they're told that if she were to put that on and never ever compare it with another female's makeup, right? That needs to be done too. But this is like general advice, obviously. It's not religious advice. But if she puts like makeup on for you in a specific way, hypothetically, and you have to tell her that you prefer this, that would be taken a lot of times as like, oh, so you think that I don't look good without this, right? Or something like that. So you have to be like, you know, إذا استمتعت بها, that if you were to take advantage of her, or it's not, sorry, have have pleasure with her, استمتعت بها وبها عوج. And you do it in a way that you have to understand that, well, she's still in a dila'. She's the way she is. She will always be as such. So two extremes you got to avoid, right? One is that you try to make her straight. What does that mean? Like try to make her what she's not. As a woman, not talking about general views, etc. Right? So she follows like a political party, and then you go like, well, that's actually wrong. And like, you cannot make me what I'm not. That's who I am. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like as a woman, certain things you cannot expect for them or from them. Sorry, so you can't do that, right? The other extreme is the fact that you just let it go and be like, well, she's gonna stay with iwaj, crooked all her life, so there's nothing that we can do about it. So she is just, I'm just gonna mind my own business, and she can do and become like a havoc of an old female later on, enabled and privileged. That happens a lot. Like older females completely controlling, her children. Whatever she says goes on, and the guy is like sitting in her husband, the old husband. He's just sitting in the corner and does nothing. He's like, well, she's gonna decide, or something like that. Like the pure betas, right? Like they don't do anything, and those females that control everything, and that's an enabled female. There are certain situations like that, purely enabled female. And she would say something like, you know what? I remember my father used to do this, so that's what's going to happen now. They're like, okay. And everyone just starts following. A weird traditional home, but it's looked at in a positive ways because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the mother multiple times. He said, don't give it a religious look. This is you and your tradition. What happened to the qawam now? Right? Astaghfirullah. So the balance would be that you allow women to be as they are in terms of being women, but you always try to advise them for bringing positive changes, religious changes in their lives, right? But the positivity needs to be maintained. There's obviously, again, the views of ones are excluded. Hadith 20, that is the last one we'll do today, and then we'll wrap it up. Sexual intimacy during menstruation. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, this is one of the main rights that relates between the two, that is sometimes forcefully made to be done by males too, unfortunately, which is completely not permitted. أن اليهود كانت إذا حاضت منهم المرأة أخرجوها من البيت. That the Jewish people of that time, it doesn't have to be a tradition that's still preserved. At that time, the Jewish people were such that when a female would menstruate, they would send her out of the home, right? They would make her leave the home. وَلَمْ يُآكِلُوهَا, they would not sit and eat with her. وَلَمْ يُشَارِبُوهَا, they would not sit and drink with her. وَلَمْ يُجَامِعُوهَا فِي الْبَيْتِ, they would not have sexual intercourse with her in the home, or be sexually intimate with her in the home, inside the rooms, you could say, right? Bayt can be used for a room, or it can be used for a home as well, traditionally, classically. فَسُئِلَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم عَنْ ذَلك. So the Prophet ﷺ was asked about this. رواه أبو داود بسنن صحيح ومسلم. This narration comes with a sound chain of transmission in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, right? So Prophet ﷺ was asked about this. فأنزل الله تعالى ذكره. Then Allah تبارك وتعالى, He revealed ويسألونك عن المحيض. The Sahaba or the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they asked you, or they ask you of the mahid, that is menstruation itself, or performing sexual intercourse, or being intimate in it, however you understand it.
because sometimes the hadf al-mudaf is done here too. قُلْ هُوَ أَذَى. Say it is something that is harmful or filth. Adha comes to the meaning of filth as well, right? فَاعْتَزِلُ النِّسَاء. So remain away or be distant or keep away, however you want to translate it. It's generally telling you i'tizal means like separation. So be separate. النِّسَاء فِي الْمَحْيِض, in the time of their menstruation. إلى آخر الآية, towards the end of the ayah. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the Prophet ﷺ said after this, so he stipulated and explained something after that. جامعوهن في البيوت واصنعوا كل شيء غير النكاح. That is, you can be sexually intimate with them within the homes. واصنعوا كل شيء غير النكاح. And do whatever you want. Do everything except النكاح. That is sexual intercourse. And there is a difference of opinion among the people in knowledge as in what could be done and what could not be done. So there is an agreement among all four schools that whatever is above the navel and whatever is below the knee, right? The rukbah, the knee, is considered to be okay. It's completely fine. Like whatever is not part of her awrah in a way, or that relates to her hayd indisposition. The whole female is like the awrah technically. But this part, you would not do istimta', that you would not gain sexual benefit from that area itself. The Hanafi school has two opinions. The more popular one is the one that I mentioned here. And the other one that has been related, and the Sariwah from Ahmad as well, is what is supported by this hadith. That it was وَاصْنَعُوا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ غَيْرَ النِّكَاحِ. That is, do everything except sexual intercourse itself. Does that make sense? So there are two views among the fuqaha on this. Sorry. That anything is permissible except just staying away from that part. That part too, for those people who are of the view that below the navel and above the knee, generally speaking, I'm not really getting into the discussion of what the navel itself or the knee itself is a part of it or not, just generally that area. If it's covered, then it's permissible to do istimta' from that as well. That makes sense? So if those parts are covered, then istimta', that is to seek sexual benefit or to have sexual pleasure or gratification, is completely fine as long as that part is covered. Muhammad ibn Hassan and others, they have a different opinion on this issue. And the other Hanafi view, or the view that is among the Hanafiya and some of the Hanabila as well, that exists is that it's permitted to even have sexual pleasure without a covering of those parts as well. The only thing that is not permitted is to perform sexual intercourse itself. So there's a consensus that sexual intercourse itself is unlawful. There's a consensus that whatever is above the navel is lawful. There's a consensus that whatever is below the knees is lawful to touch, to gain sexual pleasure from. Now the difference of opinion is whether in between those areas and other than sexual intercourse, is it okay to gain sexual gratification or pleasure from that or not? So there are two views. One is that if there's a covering, it's okay. The other view is that no, without a covering is okay as well. But the main thing is that you understand these views, the consensus ones, and the one that is the difference. The difference of opinion obviously has its own views. It has its own proofs. The proof for the popular view, that is also the Hanafi standardized view as well. That is, it's not permitted for you to even gain sexual gratification or pleasure between those areas that I'm talking about, the navel and the knee, unless if it's covered. That makes sense? That is backed up by the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, that the Prophet ﷺ would do this, perform this during our hayd. Does that make sense? And the other view that I mentioned here is backed up by this narration, وَاصْنَعُوا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ غَيْرَ النِّكَاحِ. Both of those views are valid views, and I told you the standardized views of the Hanafi school. I don't think there's a non-Hanafi here. رواه ابن ماجه بسند الصحيح ولفظه اصنعوا كل شيء إلا الجماع. The other wording that comes from Ibn Majah is that do whatever or everything that you can إلا الجماع. The word جماع over there comes very explicitly. وفي رواية النسائي, and النسائي رحمه الله also narrates the same hadith with the sound chain of transmission too. He says, فإذا رأى أحدكم امرأة فأعجبته فليأتي أهله فإن ذلك يرد مما نفسه. That if a man were to come, I think this is the previous one, right? Yeah. Right. There's another wording for it. It actually says, I'll just mention it. This needs to be corrected. There is a narration from An-Nasa'i that comes that mentioned إصنعوا كل شيء ما خلا الجماع as well. So the difference between the riwayah of Ibn Majah and the riwayah of An-Nasa'i is ما خلا and إلا, or خلا and إلا. Am I making sense, guys? This is a mistake. This needs to be corrected. But the point is, the word jima' and the word nikah, both of them have come in sound chains of transmission, and they mention that everything is permitted except sexual intercourse itself. Sexual intercourse itself, it's not allowed by consensus. Whatever is above the navel is allowed by consensus. Whatever is below the navel is allowed by consensus. Any act that is done, as long as there is no haram consumption, there is no outer factor that is going to make it haram, if that makes sense, right? Some sort of like if someone is harming someone in a way that's not permitted, or consuming something that is not permitted, or those things would make it unlawful. Otherwise, everything is permissible. So let's say that if a female were to perform, you have to be explicit about certain things, right? If she is in the state of hayd and she were to perform a manual sexual act on the man, right? You guys understand what I'm saying? Right? Yeah, like she uses her mano, right? Her hand, for example. If she were to use that, it's completely fine. It's not haram at all. There's nothing haram that would happen. And it's completely fine to understand this too, because a lot of people ask these questions. And they would be like, we don't know the sexual ruling regarding that. And it's completely fine, because the istimta' is being established between the husband and wife, and they're avoiding anything haram. Certain people, unfortunately, some Muslims too, that themselves have told me as a form of, like, obviously that we know how to repent from this and other things, they actually indulge in having sexual intercourse while the female is in hayd as well. And for some reason, they find it more unnatural to do other acts that could possibly allow them to, like, stall off until she is done with her menstrual period. I don't understand that at all, right? I don't know how that makes sense. Like, everything is permissible, except sexual intercourse right now, or I should say the vaginal intercourse right now. Obviously, anal intercourse, we'll talk about that when the hadith comes about it explicitly. But vaginal intercourse is what we're focusing on right now, right? Vaginal intercourse is unlawful. That's like the main thing that's unlawful right now, right? Because the hadith specifically mentions it, the ayah generically mentions it, and you're still having it. I don't know how that makes sense, right? As for the other forms of sexual acts, we'll talk about them later, inshallah. But again, this needs to be understood, because we talked about obedience a little. We talked about, like, istawsu bin nisa'i khayra, etc. No woman is allowed to perform a haram sexual act on or with her husband, even if the husband is insisting or, like, acting up. It's completely unlawful. If the husband says that he wants to perform sexual intercourse during her menstrual period, it is completely haram for him to perform it. It is completely haram for her to actually allow him to perform it, or perform with him, whatever is going on between them. Right? It's completely haram. Obedience or submissiveness, goodness, kindness, nothing works. Nothing is actually taken into factor here. It's direct disobedience to God by consensus, by the explicit hadiths and the ayat of the Prophet of Allah and His Messenger. They very clearly mention there is no second opinion about it. So if a man were to insist on this, and they would say, well, that's what a lot of people do, and a lot of times they give examples of non-Muslims too. They go, well, a lot of non-Muslim people do that, whatever. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. We're not talking about whether it's naturally good or not. Well, the blood has been proven to be not that filthy scientifically. No one cares. No one cares. That over here can be interpreted differently then, maybe. But the legal ruling remains to be the same, that it's completely unlawful. In fact,
it will definitely be considered to be a major sin if a person were to do it. And there's a debate among the scholars: is the person who allows it or who deems it permissible, does he go outside the fold of Islam or not? Allah save us. And there's also a difference of opinion regarding whether if a person ends up doing it by mistake, Allah save us from this. But if you were to do it, is there any kafara for it? Huh? Like any form of tasadduq or not? So the adhar in the madhab of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is that you give a donation or charity that is the equivalent of a dinar or half of a dinar, which some Hanbalis have related from Muhammad ibn Hassan too. But the standardized view among the majority, including the Hanafiya, is that there is no kafara or any expiation for it. It's just except tawbah. A person just is tawbah if you were to perform sexual or vaginal intercourse. The reason why I keep on pointing out vaginal is because if any other sexual act is performed and that is done within the parameters that I've mentioned, then it's completely halal. Right? So you cannot go to the extreme of like you can't even touch the females. There are people today, I promise you, on planet Earth, there are Muslims in Muslim lands that actually believe that your clothes also become impure if you were to just touch them, if the female were to touch them. That's completely baseless. There's no such thing. The blood itself that is impure would make something impure, not the touch itself. Right? There are explicit narrations that go against it too. And when that does not happen, does anything happen between the husband and the wife? Absolutely not. Nothing happens. Let's take the question, inshallah. There's a question here that says, is this hadith mutawatir because wouldn't it make them outside the fold of Islam if someone rejected it? No, not this hadith itself, but the narrations that are, against the performance of sexual intercourse. There are many, yeah. So that's why I said there's a debate about it. If someone believes that they are considered to be mutawatir to the extent that a person is denying it, and the person does deny it, he will definitely go outside the fold of Islam. But to individually say that this person has gone outside the fold of Islam, so it's hard to prove because usually people don't really believe that it's permitted. It's usually mistakes that are committed by Muslims specifically. Right? This is one of the basic things that Muslims know. Alhamdulillah. Or if they don't, they should. Right? Yeah. What are the other questions? Would you not say that the application of these texts, that is laws and marriage under the system in the West, can oftentimes be far more ideal? From what? I'm not understanding the context. It doesn't allow one to really experience what the Sharia has said to achieve with these marital laws in place. Oftentimes it can put women in a marginalized situation. What would your suggestion be for that? Well, I actually think that the rules are a lot more flexible for women here in the West than they are in many of the places. Like it's accommodating both religious rules and non-religious rules. So if anything, the women are not getting marginalized. If anything, it's the opposite. It's the other way around, right? So at least in the Western parts that we're exposed to, right? But if there is something that you can work around, then you would work around. But you have to follow the religious parameters properly because this is a religious bond. I'm talking about nikah here. We're not talking about whether your marriage is registered or it's civil or not. We're talking about the nikah here. If the nikah happens, your marriage starts from there, even if you registered it a week later. Right? So your actual marriage or your understanding of what is a marriage is in light of whatever Allah Ta'ala has said that this is a marriage. So when that comes into existence, all the rules of it or parameters related to them, they also come into existence. So they need to be followed in line with Sharia itself. So if certain thing is the right of a female, she has the right to demand that. If something is the right of a male, he has the right to demand that. If something that is unlawful, even if the legal system allows it, they allow having sexual intercourse during the menstrual cycle. But the Sharia says it's completely unlawful. So that needs to be looked at. And if there's a conflict between the two, then obviously you should not put yourself in trouble if it's only permitted. Right? And if there's a workaround, then there's a workaround. Conflict in the sense that if I were to say that, as I mentioned, that you cannot have two civil marriages here in Canada. So you cannot have two legal marriages. So you would not. But we were talking about nikah though, right? So two relationships, halal relationships, can you have that or not? Yes, you can. Because they're like, we don't care what kind of relationships you have as long as it's not considered to be civil marriage. If that makes sense. As for what rights would she have based on that, well, that totally depends on like what kind of man you're dealing with, right? There are certain things that could make sense, right? If it's not registered in a way that it's in a civil way. So let's say if they separate and it was not a civil marriage, then she will have a hard time establishing a lot of things. But Islamically, there's not a lot to establish anyway, right? The only thing would be like what? Financial support. I would say that financial support too, a lot of times is not for a lot of females, it's not a lot. For a lot of females, the financial support that comes through the system too, I could be wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is not that much. Sometimes, or a lot of times. Like not every female gets everything paid for. There are a lot of females that I personally know that are actually, even though their marriage was registered, but they were not really, they're not really getting a lot from their ex-husbands. Especially,
it depends on the guy.
yeah, it depends on the person himself. So there's only a limit to which the legal system can help you. I hope that was clear. This is the only question that I see in the group. There was something that said Nazaba clarified that, I think. Let's look at the link for whoever's in the group. If they've sent questions. There are people send questions.
Yeah.
It's a minute. Okay. Can you recommend some books related to the topic of Ismat al-Anbiya? It's not related to the class. I'm going to skip it. Now, based on the hadith, would it be haram to hate a believing woman? Yes, it will be haram to have hatred for a believing woman. Yeah. Just as it's haram to hate your Muslim brothers and sisters too, right? So you should try, not hating them. Obviously, sometimes when you say that I hate this person, you're just trying to say that there are certain characteristics that you don't like about them, right? So maybe like switch your language, change it up a little, or etc. Yeah. But like to actually have hate for that person in a way that you have built, you're not supposed to have that, right? But in this hadith particularly, because you look at the context, it says that another quality and the khuluq would be looked at, and you would personally be pleased with that. It refers to the fact that the consistency in bad habits should not lead you to be hateful towards the female. So you should look at positive qualities more so than you look at the negative qualities. What should a wife do if she continues to make the same egregious mistake over and over to her husband, and he strongly dislikes her now? Let's say us from this. It depends on what kind of mistake it is. If it is something that is within the parameters of permissibility, then it makes sense for the husband to possibly look at certain things and stop strongly disliking her. It's totally dependent on the personal temperament, because this cannot guarantee whether the marriage remains or not, right? A person can still not dislike the female and be like, I don't want to be a part of this, and seek separation. If it's outside the bounds of permissibility, that the female is doing certain things that is making her dislike her, then I think it's beyond that, right? Because when it says لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة, it will be a mu'min that is trying to be his best, and a mu'minah that is trying to be her best. So it doesn't make sense for you to say that a female goes and commits sexual acts with someone who's married, and the guy will be like, well, I have no ill feelings towards you. You will have ill feelings towards that person, right? That is outside the parameters of what is permitted. The narration is focusing on good qualities and bad qualities that you can look at someone, and then you're preferring or pulling the way towards or gravitating towards good qualities more so than evil qualities or bad qualities. Evil, I guess, is a harsh word, but bad qualities makes more sense. When he proposed to the female, did he have his parents do it since he didn't see her? The Hadith of al-Mughira. What does that mean? Did he have his parents do it? Yeah. It's possible that he could have spoken to her before behind the veil too, but it seems like he proposed first, or he was in the process of the proposal, and he had not seen her first. And then the Prophet ﷺ corrected that, and he said that go look at her. And then he wanted to look too. The parents were resisting, and they were saying that they didn't want to look. They were disliking the fact that he would look. My spouse told me his other wife is his one and only. And his everything. Is this permissible? This is a very personal question. So it's possible that, I don't know. So a spouse, so man said that his other wife is his one and only. Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility. It doesn't really invalidate, legally speaking, it doesn't invalidate someone's nikah if you have someone, if you love one more than the other, right? And I think one, the only is just like an expression that you love someone more or exclusively more, etc. So Allah knows whatever they're going through or whatever settlement they have. The next question is, what do you mean by crooked? As in, are they personality traits that are feminine? Feminine, I guess, as females should be, that cannot be made again, mainly straightened. What does that mean? Like, no, like if being feminine is not being targeted. Yeah? It's having traits that are problematic, but associated with, normally associated with females, right? Socially speaking, what we're talking. Like, obviously, when people are talking about, let's say, nagging, right, in a relationship, like usually what's imagined is the female is nagging. So, or the opposite side, the silent treatment is usually imagined to be like the guy to be the one who's like, he's gonna go silent now. It's not gonna do anything, right? A lot of times it could be flipped too, possibly, but the main thing is that the understanding factor of it. Like the man is supposed to be more compassionate and more gentle towards a female that is within the parameters of permissibility. Obviously, I need to keep on like pointing that out. That within the parameters of permissibility, what is it saying? Dealing with the female. What was the saying before? I had to point out that within the parameters. Anyways, yeah, he's soft and gentle with the females, and there are certain characteristics that are going to be associated with the females because of the fact that you will say that, well, you know what, she's more emotional, empathetically, if someone says that. So certain steps will be taken because of that. So you don't try to make her just like you in the way that a male would be. Rather, try to focus on positively getting the best version of herself, if that makes sense. Is a woman living with her in-laws entitled to have her own kitchen, bathroom, etc., or is it having her own room sufficient? Because of the amr that comes in the Quran, askinuhunna, that is, you provide them with sukna. The scholars, along with the ijma', we will discuss this more extensively inshallah later on. The scholars, with the consensus of that fact, because it's from the basic necessities of a female, that she were to be provided with accommodation by the male. So that's there. But an additional stipulation as like someone else does not have access to it is definitely something that requires a lot more strong proof. The main thing is accommodation in of itself is provided for the female in a way that she is comfortably living her life. If her comfort gets challenged, right, that's when the question comes in that, okay, you know what, she's not comfortable in this. That's why the conflicts exist, because one side looks at it from the perspective of the female, would look at it from the perspective of my comfort is not found in this shared position, right? And you have the ability to provide me a comfortable place. So provide me that comfortable place versus the people who are sharing this, that why are you feeling discomfort with our presence here? But the fact remains that no one can force her to change her comfort zones, right? Because that's a personal thing. But the sukkah itself, contrary to the food and the clothing that is provided, is considered to be, in terms of istidlal, in terms of its dalil, it's not as strong. This needs to be understood. So in terms of how it is, like how it's provided, like what kind of place is it, that is totally dependent on how the husband decides it to be. Then the comfort zone comes in terms of her privacy being challenged or not. So there's no specific instructions related to a kitchen, a bathroom. That has been outlined by many jurists just to clarify certain things. But and this needs to be understood from both aspects, right? As in, for example, if a female is living and the kitchen is shared, right? But there's a complete comfort zone because of the fact that it's accessible by multiple people through different ways, and like there's nothing that technically taking a comfort away, but still shared. That does not mean that she's letting one of her rights go, if that makes sense. That she would actually then, pull rank later on and be like, well, you know what? I'm someone who's been letting my right go of having a shared kitchen. Shar'an, I'm supposed to have an independent kitchen. No, but you have a comfortable place here. You've been in your comfort zone here too. If that makes sense. There's no specific hadith or ayah that tells you that they need something that specific for sure. But sukna in general, like having your own personal space, is there. So I would say that it becomes relative when it comes to these specific places. But if she is in a place where she's not able to stay, in a way that her privacy is not maintained, or some haram actions are happening in there too, then it is necessary for her to provide it a different place. But the main thing is, obviously, I don't know how having her own room sufficient would make sense if we're talking about it in its most generic sense, right? Because part of like living together is to look at the fact that you accommodate each other. So there are certain situations where when we're talking about compromising, and we say that okay, when a girl settles with a guy who is not going to fulfill all of his obligations, so that could include that too, right? So there's no specific point that it cannot be shared washroom or not. Because when you're talking about a shared washroom, some women could be okay with it, some women could not be okay with it. If she's okay with it, that's within her comfort levels. There's no special right she's avoiding. If it's not, then you will have to provide her with that necessity. So it comes down to that. Are women literally created from a rib, as in Hawa was created from the rib of Adam alayhi salam, or is it metaphorical? Both views exist. There are many people in knowledge who have very clearly mentioned, including Al-Ghazi, rahimahullah, Al-Najm Al-Ghazi, and others who mentioned that, this narration actually indicates that it's talking about the dila', that is the rib of Adam alayhi salam himself, and she was created from it. Either way, it's either Adam alayhi salam or not, it will still be considered to be literal over here that she is created from dila', because there's no other dalil for going against it. There's no dalil that opposes it. But if someone were to provide a dalil or has a rajihan, has an inclination towards it being metaphorical, that does not seem to be violating any of the principle as well. Since women are created from rib, does that mean they are more likely to be evil, or they need kindness to stay in rib shape without being straightened so too far? Yes, that's what the hadith is referring to, that women are always going to be different from men. فَإِنَّهُنَّ خُلِقْنَا مِنْ ضِلَعٍ, because they were created from a rib. So there's always going to be a point where you will have to stop and be like, you're a woman, or she's a woman. Sorry, does that make sense? Like, you cannot treat her just as you treat one of your male friends. Sheikh mentioned a few times, it's a caveat, in the lecture, that abusive women were excluded. Is an abusive woman afforded anything? What should she do if she is? It's incomplete, right? Abusive women, which falls under the most extreme forms of disobedient women, or a nashiza, someone who is a violator of the personal relationship or the intimate relationship that they have. I would say, astaghfirullah, there is a point that reaches that a person should opt for divorce into if the female is abusive. Otherwise, the male does have the right to cut off all the obligations if the abuse or the offensiveness continues, right? Even sexual rights. Cut off in the sense like he would not be available for her as well. If a woman isn't living with her husband but her distant relatives, and he lives with his own family, does she still have the right to intimacy? His own family? Like, his family, his wife is his family too, right? Yeah. So I guess like this would be like with his parents, possibly, or his other wife, along those. the rights of having sexual intimacy is dependent on the access that is given to the male. So you know how like having her own place is necessary. Then the sexual rights get related to that. That she is 100% accessible by the male. Like they can have sexual intercourse whenever they feel like, or any sexual act whenever they feel like. So if living with her relatives hypothetically were to intervene or interrupt them from having that access, then there is a possibility that because the nafaqah that comes, the spending that comes with the rights being maintained. If some of the rights are being blocked off, then the nafaqah or the rights would also be blocked off because of that. That makes sense. Which is why if a female is living with her in-laws, the stronger view is that it's not mandatory on him to spend on those other necessities that are already being provided by others. Not in-laws, sorry, her parents. That makes sense, right? And in fact, to the extent that the author of Hidayah, he also mentions that even medication is not something that he's supposed to provide because it's beyond. It's not. He must provide, right? He can't. Obviously, he's supposed to. If menses is filth, why did Allah Ta'ala try women with that? Does that mean they're lesser beings religiously? Well, I don't know how there's a correlation between filth and trying women with that. It's just a bodily process. Everyone, discharges filth from their body, and the bodies are just different, and they function in a different way, right? We are not all being tried by going to the washroom. It's just a process. Does that mean they're lesser beings religiously? That's relative. What do you mean by that? If you're talking about the amount of practice, yes, they will be lesser than that, obviously, because of the fact that when they are in that state, they're not able to perform certain actions that are performed by males. But if you're talking about the intensity of religiosity, then no. Just having hayd does not make a female less in terms of religiosity, in terms of intensity. So because that would require that every single female would, based on this understanding, if it's that absolute, every single female is worse religiously or less religiously speaking than a male, which is not the case. Everyone agrees on that. The waliyat, that is the friends of Allah Ta'ala, they're females. They're much better than a lot of males. Much, much better. That was along with the hayd being there too, if that makes sense. In fact, there is a debate about Maryam alayhi salam being a prophet or not. And many early scholars, such as As-Subki and the Qurtubis, both of them, Abu Abdullah and Abu Abbas, both of them were of the view that she was a prophet. So that's the highest station that a human being can have. So there's no like absolute sense in terms of intensity that they have to be. It's just the way their body functions. Filth here is the main target of here is that you cannot perform certain actions. It's in the meaning of harming you, not that like literal filth should be understood from here. But in terms of najasa, obviously, religiously speaking, there's a consensus that it's considered najasa, the blood that is discharged. If it's haram to hate women, then divorce would not happen, especially if they are extremely evil, hypothetically. You can divorce a female even if you don't hate her. Okay. So I don't understand the question. Even if they're extremely evil, hypothetically. Can you please provide the Islamic perspective of living in a joint family, including brother-in-law? This is very long, but I will discuss this in the brother-in-law hadith that's going to come. Alhamdulillah, I will bring that hadith, inshallah. We'll discuss that. But what if he says his second wife it seems to be the same person? Well, wouldn't it mean that there is everything because everything is 100%? Does it invalidate marriage? No, it does not. It does not invalidate anyone's marriage by saying that someone loves someone more or less. If my spouse enjoys reading Imam Suyuti, rahimahullah. What kind of question? The book is more of a work of literature than it is actually And it is attributed to As-Suyuti. It is debated that As-Suyuti rahimahullah authored this text or not. There are some fawaid in this text. Now, obviously, when I'm saying that, there are no pictures in there. There's in literature, and literature itself, reading it does not make it haram. It's hard to prove that it becomes haram. If those contents, as far as I remember, the contents that I remember are not really problematic. They do mention sexual positions, etc. There's nothing wrong in sexual positions to be known. It comes in Hadith itself. Sexual positions are mentioned in the Hadith itself. If someone goes in depth in them, that does not make it more problematic, if that makes sense, right? But anyways, yeah. So it's a good read for learning from the intimacy rights. Yeah, possibly. It's more about the benefits of nikah than the rights related to intimacy. It's more about how to be intimate from a Muslim's perspective. But it's debated whether it is Suyuti's work or not. Some people have attributed to it. Some people have challenged its authenticity to or its attribution. The last question disappeared.
Those were questions. Thank you.
Okay. جزاكم الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Huh?
It's getting charged up.
صلى عليه الله ربي وعلى صحابه وآله ومن تلا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد